morning is from this book. I feel like a late night TV host. Kareen Armstrong, Fields of Blood, Religion and the History of Violence. And this, I think, is going to be a great tool for me to try to wrap my mind around this very complex subject. And I would recommend, if anyone in the congregation wants to join me in that endeavor, get a copy and we'll talk. This is her introduction. Every year in ancient Israel, the high priest brought 2 goats into the Jerusalem temple on the Day of Atonement. He sacrificed one to expiate the sins of the community, and then laid his hands on the other, transferring all the people's misdeeds onto its head, and sent the sin-laden animal out of the city, literally placing the blame elsewhere. In this way, Moses explained, the goat will bear all their faults away with it into a desert place. In his classic study of religion and violence, Rene Girard argued that the scapegoat ritual defused rivalries among groups within the community. In a similar way, I believe, modern society has made a scapegoat of faith. In the West, the idea that religion is inherently violent is now taken for granted and seems self-evident. As one who speaks on religion, this is talking about Kareen Armstrong from her point of view, as one who speaks on religion, I constantly hear how cruel and aggressive it has been, a view that eerily is expressed in the same way almost every time. Quote, religion has been the cause of all the major wars in history, unquote. I've heard this sentence recited like a mantra by American commentators and psychiatrists, London taxi drivers, and Oxford academics. It is an odd remark. Obviously, the 2 world wars were not fought on account of religion. When they discuss the reasons people go to war, military historians acknowledge that many interrelated social, material, and ideological factors are involved, one of the chief being competition for scarce resources. Experts on political violence or terrorism also insist people commit atrocities for a complex range of reasons. Yet so indelible is the aggressive image of religious faith in our secular consciousness that we routinely load the violent sins of the 20th century on the back of religion and drive it out into the political wilderness. Is violence inherent in religion? Today we tackle an issue much in the news and often on the lips of some of us. Is religion inherently violent? We seem to be awash in disturbing reports of atrocities committed by groups claiming the banner of Islam, from the attack of 9/11 to the brutal murders committed on camera by the so-called Islamic State, to the shocking attack on the offices of Charlie Hebdo in Paris in January. Right-wing pundits have seized on these horrors to argue that Islam is inherently violent. You who know our history have reason right off the bat to be skeptical of this claim. We would not be here if all Islam was inherently violent. For European Unitarianism took root in Transylvania in the 16th century when that region was a protectorate of the Ottoman Empire. Had the Ottoman state insisted on forced conversion to Islam for all of its subjects back then, it is doubtful that I would be speaking from a Unitarian Universalist pulpit today. President Obama made news with his remarks at the National Prayer Breakfast in February, 3 weeks after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. After condemning these and other instances of Islamic violent extremism, he said this: so how do we, as people of faith, reconcile these realities? The profound good, the strength, the tenacity, the compassion and love that can flow from all our faiths, operating alongside those who seek to hijack religions for their own murderous ends. Humanity has been grappling with these questions throughout human history. This is still Obama talking. And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. In our home country, slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ. Michelle and I returned from India, an incredible, beautiful country full of magnificent diversity, but a place where in past years religious faiths of all types have, on occasion, been targeted by other peoples of faith simply due to their heritage and beliefs, acts of intolerance that would have shocked Gandhi, the person who helped to liberate that nation, unquote. These words brought down the fury of Fox News on the president's head. No one seems to have noticed that he condemned Hindu extremists in the sentence after his 2 sentences in reference to Christianity. They were outraged that he would mention the violence in Christianity's past when he should be focusing on Islam. Both our presidents since 9/11 have taken pains to say that while we meet violence coming from Muslim terrorist groups with force, we have no quarrel with Islam itself. For President Obama to mention the Crusades in a national speech emphasizes this, for he is in effect saying there exists no crusade, no holy war against Islam. The U.S. president says this because the rhetoric of radical Islam is that there is a holy war, that modern secular democracy is inconsistent with Islam, and Muslims should wage jihad until the West is defeated. When I preached on the Islamic State a few months ago, I noted that they embrace an apocalyptic vision which foresees a great battle to be fought at a particular place in Syria, which will usher in the new reign of Islam. So in the conflict of ideas, Western governments maintain, as they must, that this is not about Islam, but about stopping terrorist murder, oppression, and territorial expansion. And they both try to enlist the governments of Muslim countries in the fight to give legitimacy to this claim, and call upon Muslims everywhere to renounce violence. But there's no profit in that position for the right, far right in America. So the far right echoes radical Islam to assert that indeed it is a holy war. All Muslims are potentially violent, and we should be fighting for the preservation of Christianity. In part, this is due to a Christian apocalyptic vision held by some right-wing supporters, which is a mirror image of the Muslim Armageddon, but which Christ is going to win and have a 1,000-year reign. In part, this is due to conservatives' visceral hatred of Obama and the need to exploit any perceived softness of the president. Every day he commits the crime of governing while black. In another age, he might be accused of being soft on crime or communism. In today's domestic politics, radical Islam furnishes a convenient other on which to focus hatred and fear. This is the old fear-based politics, which we have seen for most of my lifetime in America. What concerns us this morning, however, is not why right-wing voices would claim that Islam is inherently violent, but whether that claim is true. Conservatives have made a heroine out of an ex-Muslim named Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who has been an outspoken critic of Islam for 2 decades. Her most recent book is called Heretic, and it argues that, quote, Islamic violence is rooted not in social, economic, or political conditions, or even in theological error, but rather in the foundational text of Islam itself, unquote. In a review of the book in the New York Times, reviewer Susan Dominicus notes, Hirsi Ali is not merely looking to emphasize or reinterpret select scriptural passages. Rather, she wants the reader that if Islam was a house, she would be going for a gut renovation, one that would make the outside look a lot like the original but change the house radically from the inside, equipping it with the latest amenities. Hirsi Ali is advocating radical surgery. She wants Islam to repudiate and nullify core elements of the faith, the semi-divine status of Muhammad, the literalist reading of the Quran, Sharia law, and most of Islamic jurisprudence. Hirsi Ali's conclusion, according to this reviewer, is that Islam is not a religion of peace. Some people consider Hirsi Ali a prophet, others a purveyor of hate speech. I only know that individuals rarely get to remake a religion from the ground up. And if you want to influence change in a religion, it's often better to do it from within rather than lobbing verbal bombshells from without. Following the publication of Hirsi Ali's latest attack on Islam, we've had another weird twist. Actually, going back to the Charlie Hebdo thing, the call for moderate Muslims to make their voices heard was heard. And a group of moderate Muslims in Garland, Texas, where there happens to be a fairly substantial Islamic community, organized basically a peace conference, the Stand with the Prophet Against Hate and Terror. And a bunch of Muslims came to that from all over the country. And they found a surprising conflagration in the little town where all the right-wing Christians went and picketed them. They couldn't believe that there were that many Muslims in the country. What are all these Muslims doing here? So that focused a little bit of attention on Garland, Texas. And then this agitator named Pamela Geller decides to focus on that and sets up her own thing in the exact hotel where the Muslim Peace Conference had been. She set up a contest to draw a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. And hoping to bait Muslims. It didn't work with the local Muslims. They stayed home in droves. They didn't picket, they didn't do anything, just ignored it. The town sent a police detail in case there should be trouble. But a couple of guys from Phoenix decided to come armed to the teeth to defend the honor of the Prophet. And as soon as they drew out their assault weapons, the cops shot them dead. So we have a death toll of 2 people for that in an entirely manufactured crisis. But it wasn't that it was really about free speech, which is what Pamela Geller contended afterwards. It was really to demonstrate this right-wing article of faith that Islam is inherently violent. What it really demonstrated is if you manipulate people's emotions enough, they'll do almost anything. 3 weeks ago, I preached on retribution in Christianity and argued that the actual teachings of Jesus are against retribution. But his message has been distorted by Orthodox Christianity over the centuries, which I said is why we have had violent movements like the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades in the name of Christianity. The question of retribution, of course, has resurfaced in the last 2 days in comments on the Tsarnaev death penalty. Many opposed to executing Tsarnaev think we are creating a new martyr for the cause of global jihad because retribution feeds on retribution. But that's not what I want to talk about this morning. There is one thinker in recent decades who believes that violence is at the heart of all religions, that all religions are in some sense founded on violence. And you've already heard his name in Kareen Armstrong's introduction, Rene Girard, G-I-R-A-R-D. If you pronounce it in a real French fashion, Girard, it sounds almost like jihad. So you've got to watch that. Girard would be the American mispronunciation of it. Rene Girard is French, and he spent most of his academic career in the US, started out teaching literature, and his first books were of literary criticism. It was through his analysis of literary works and scripture that he developed his theories on violence at the heart of human culture and religion in the form of the scapegoat mechanism. Girard thinks that the basis of human psychology is desire, But the desire works by imitation, what he calls mimesis. We don't desire anything until we see another person desiring it. So there's a three-way relation between you, the thing you desire, and the model, the other person who desired it first. The process by which the model influences another person's desire is called mediation. Think of this example. A company selling a product will hire a celebrity, someone whom you already know from the movies or TV or sports, to pitch the product. And when you see Tom Brady using a brand of aftershave, you want to use that brand too. Most of the time, the model is not really your rival for the thing desired, for you're on different planes. That's what he calls the situation of external mediation. But sometimes your desire is stimulated not just for something like what the model wants, but for the very thing. And then it's internal mediation, and you have become a rival with the model for the thing that you desire. This creates a tension. And in a community where everyone cannot have the object of desire, the tension can get to the point where it threatens to tear apart the whole community. The community then, in an unconscious process, fears that it's about to dissolve, and in a very bizarre thing happens. Communal violence is suddenly projected on a single individual. People who are struggling with each other can now unite against a common enemy who is given the name of scapegoat. Communal dissolution is averted. Now, in the book of Leviticus, the scapegoat is a sacrificial animal in the Jewish ritual prescribed for the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. The high priest selects 2 goats, one among other animals to be sacrificed, and one of them is slaughtered to atone for the sins of the people, but the other is set free in the wilderness, and the sins of the people are said to be on it. Girard seizes on this figure and makes it central to his analysis of religions. But unlike the scapegoat of Yom Kippur, the scapegoat in Girard's thinking is actually killed by the community after having been turned into the common enemy. But the whole process is unconscious. The people do not realize that they are employing the scapegoat mechanism. They have heaped enough blame on his head that they really think he is evil and deserves to die. Killing the scapegoat brings about unexpected peace. But the moment is so marvelous that it acquires a religious overtone, and the victim is immediately raised to holy status. This consecration of the murdered victim is an attempt to perpetuate the feeling of social solidarity which followed the selection of the scapegoat. Girard believes this is the mechanism by which all religions are founded, but that Jesus understood the scapegoat mechanism and sought to subvert it by making it visible. However, after his execution, his followers did not understand the meaning of his life or his death and continued with the scapegoating mechanism. We don't have time here for more than this taste of Girard's ideas, and I don't know what to make of them myself. But I wanted to show you that there have been serious thinkers before 9/11 who held that some type of violence was inherent in all religion. I am suspicious of Girard's theory because, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, he seems to get most of his understanding of religions from an analysis of its texts. Texts are important, but no religion is simply the sum of its sacred texts. Who would want for Unitarian Universalism to be judged by a copy of our hymnal? The rich life that we have, the immense variety of opinions that we bring to ourselves and the rich conversations we have are only vaguely represented in any text that we might write down. Kareen Armstrong understands this. Kareen, whom we know from her fine books over the last 2 decades, such as The History of God, The Spiral Staircase, The Great Transformation, and many others, in 2014 published this book addressed to the relation between violence and religion in all the world's religions, Fields of Blood. It is a tour de force, for it examines the historical, economic, cultural, and ethnic dimensions of each set of conflicts in each era to try to tease out to what extent a religion is involved. For example, she discusses the nature of Christianity before Constantine, When Christians were sporadically persecuted by the Roman Empire, they were the victims of violence, and its transformation into an instrument of imperial violence when Constantine adopted it as the religion of the empire. I've only had time to dip into a few chapters, but the main arguments of the book were summarized by James Fallows, a writer I trust, in a review in the New York Times last December. Quote, "The page-by-page detail of the book is much of the reason to read it, but if you reduce its complexities and tangles to their essence, they would amount to 3 points. First, through most of human history, people have chosen to intertwine religion with all their other activities, including, notably, how they are governed. This was not because ambitious churchmen had mixed up two essentially distinct activities, she says, but because people wanted to endow everything they did with significance. That is to say, the idea of separation of church, the idea of a religious realm and a secular realm, did not exist in much of antiquity, in much of pre-modern times. Second, this involvement with politics means that religions have often been tied up with violence. Crusaders, conquistadors, jihadists, and many more. But a point Armstrong cares about so much that she makes it dozens of times, the violence almost always originates with the state and spills over to religion rather than vice versa. This, she says, is because any governing body, democratic or tyrannical, peace-loving or expansionist, quote, was obliged to maintain at its heart an institution committed to treachery and violence, unquote, and because, quote, violence and coercion lay at the heart of social existence, unquote. The earliest states required force to maintain systems of agricultural production. Mature ones found that the threat of violence by police within their borders, by armies between them, was sadly the best way to keep the peace. Third, citizens thus faced the duty of confronting and trying to control violence carried out in their name by the state without blaming religion for it or imagining that the solution lies in a cleaner separation of church and state. This extends to understanding the roots of violence or terrorism directed against them. As an inspiration of terrorism, Kareen Armstrong writes, nationalism has been far more productive than religion. And this is the last words of Fallows. And religions face the dilemma of whether to accept the protection of a state and the threat of violence that necessarily entails, or to live in hermetic isolation, unquote. So I brought you all this way this morning to tell you that I don't have an answer to the question of whether religions in general are inherently violent. But I'm inclined to believe that the answer will be found in the gritty details of Kareen Armstrong's analysis, rather than the sweeping theories of Girard or the polemical condemnation of Hirsi Ali. For Armstrong is persuasive that this question of the relation of violence and religion is a great deal more complex than appears at first glance. The very term religion only acquired its present meaning in the Enlightenment, though we certainly had religions before then. It evolved in tandem with its opposite, secularism, a category that didn't exist until the 18th century. When the world was pervasively religious, any phenomenon which arose was tied up with religion. But that is a far cry from saying that any violence which broke out was caused by the religion. And then the parallel question arises, what is violence? Is it only homicide and physical injury? Or are systems of oppression and injustice such as slavery, patriarchy, homophobia also included within the term violence? And the third major, try to imagine this for a second. Suppose you have a little village, isolated village in the Amazon, and Exxon Corporation moves in and says you can't keep on with your subsistence agriculture and your barter economy anymore. You have to convert to a cash economy. And within 20 years, they convert to a cash economy and they're watching Western movies and whatnot. Their culture disappeared. Is that violence? Nobody got killed? But a lot of people would say, yes, that was violent. They didn't have any choice in the matter. The third major term in the question also has layers of complexity. What do we mean by inherent? Is the existence of one scriptural passage, which is usually ignored in practice, enough to make the religion as a whole an endorser of particular types of violence? I raise these points of complexity because the most strident voices in this conversation will not raise them, but will smooth out the complexities in the quest to win new converts. Kareen Armstrong earns my trust by examining these complexities. I can understand the frustrations of some of those who want a simple yes or no answer to a question like this. And I will have to go back to my law school training. It reminds me of the famous passage from a classic I read back then, Francis Parkman's The Art of Cross-Examination. The lawyer was berating the witness on the stand, saying, "Just answer the question, yes or no." The witness said, "I can't answer the question, yes or no." The lawyer roared, "Of course you can. Any question can be answered yes or no." To which the witness replied, "Oh, is that so? May I ask when you stopped beating your wife?" Call me a Douglas hope fiend, but I continue to believe that whether or not religion got us into the mess we're in today, religion provides the means to get us out. The golden rule and the message of toleration, forgiveness, and compassion, taught not just by Jesus, but by the Buddha and the Dalai Lama and Gandhi and Thich Nhat Hanh and Aben Ballou and Martin Luther King Jr., exposes the lie of violence and points us all toward a better future if we will just listen. Amen.